Hello, and thanks for having me today. I'm sorry I can't be with you there in Edinburgh. My goal with my portion of today is to primarily identify what the importance of arts and culture is. I really wanted to prioritize the idea of values and how you value sustainability within the context of either running an arts organization or as an artist, and then how you might teach this to those who aspire to run arts organizations and support artists. So I'm going to cover this in sort of three different areas, coming out of that Brundtland Commission discussion about what's been referred to as the triple bottom line, or the three dimensions of sustainability, or if you think about it sort of as the nested model of sustainability. But I'm going to start with the socio-political, or how society is impacted. So I'll first point to Simon Brough, who's currently the head of the Canada Council for the Arts. He released a book called No Culture, No Future, while he was still the CEO of the National Theatre School in Montreal. And he said, "We are more and more convinced that culture attracts, sells, brings people together, entertains, appeals, and impresses, and that it allows us to bridge the gap between local and international, the specific and the universal, allows us to exchange and share, counting on the possibility of a dialogue that transcends language and imperfect translations, as well as codes, belief, religions, and differences of all manner." I point to this because I want to highlight the 2004 monograph from the RAND Corporation, Gifts of the Muse, which starts to talk about intrinsic impact versus instrumental impact. We have heard a lot of defense of arts funding or different utility of the arts through the instrumental benefits, the cognitive benefits around the development of learning skills and around the impact on academic performance, attitudinal and behavioral impacts around self-discipline, efficacy, and behavior, and then also health, mental and physical health, improvements and reduced stress and anxiety. But there's a lot of issues with these. There's a weakness in the empirical method. It doesn't necessarily take into account opportunity costs. There's a bit of an absence of specificity. So if we look to the Gifts of the Muse monograph, we can see that people are drawn to the arts not for their instrumental effects, but because the arts can provide them with meaning and with a distinctive type of pleasure and emotional stimulation. So they started looking at the intrinsic benefits and how to measure these around captivation, pleasure, expanded capacity for empathy, creation of social bonds, and the expression of communal meaning. And so you can see this represented in Wolf Brown's study on the intrinsic impact of live theater. For instance, they took a look at multiple productions of Ruined, Lynn Nottage's Pulitzer Prize-winning play. Several theaters with the same, within this sample, presented the same or similar productions, in this case Ruined. Both Arena Stage and Berkeley Rep surveyed audiences after the production, and they yielded strikingly similar results. Insofar as the way that it created dialogue around this play that involves the plight of women in civil war-torn DRC, or Democratic Republic of Congo, and how that impacted communities that felt some sort of affinity towards these issues here, either because of the topics or because of those involved with it, and that way that it created communal meaning. They also found interesting results from presenting the same play, which in this case is Anna Devereaux Smith's Let Me Down Easy. The title resonates on several levels, reverberating with meaning of love, loss, and faith that sustains people in times of difficulty and ultimately the end of life. The same two theaters presented the same production with similar patterns of results, but a much higher magnitude of impact reported by single ticket buyers as supported by performances late in the Berkeley run. And what they found were that 30% of attendees who left a performance with unanswered questions, it's one of their metrics, were able to articulate these questions, showing that they had been affected. They found that through their study that story contributed to double the perceived value compared to the familiarity with artists, whether or not that's a playwright or a star, in the show itself. That reading previews, reviews, and social media comments prior to attending had a small but significant effect on increasing anticipation levels, but did not correlate with higher impacts. And familiarity with the story or the production contributed to twice the predictive value compared to the familiarity with the cast or the playwright. And what this sort of looks at is how it builds individual and social identity through the arts. Also in the Bay Area, there was the Arts Diversity Index, which was conducted by Clay Lord, who's now at Americans for the Arts, which took a look at how we might look at the difference of valuing diversity versus trying to actively manage diversity, and doing this through saying, here are the people who are coming to the theater and the people who work in the theater, and here's the community in which that theater exists, and how do those line up or not. And so we're looking at this various types of intrinsic impact data and how it integrates with community to reify that community and individual identity. And these sort of ideas of local identity and image and social cohesion are actually part of the guidelines already of the Canada Council for the Arts. This is modified a little bit with a change in guidelines in the last couple of years, but we see this reflection that the arts serve as a demonstrable community and social value building tool, which is a sustainability metric. So if we want to look at it instead as an economic value, we can look at the Arts and Economic Prosperity 4 report, which is the 2013 report from Americans for the Arts, is a more recent one. And we can see that the arts in the United States generated $135.2 billion of economic activity. 61, a little less than half of this, 61 billion was from the organizations, and 74 was event-related expenditures. And overall, this created a revenue of over $22 billion in local, state, and federal government coffers in tax revenue. And that this was based off of about $4 billion in total arts allocations at all of those different levels. If you look in Canada, which is perhaps the next closest model for arts spending, the way that this contributed to GDP is a significant impact on the economy, both driving employment and spending. We have that over-ticket spending of about $24 per ticket within the United States that then goes primarily into local economy. So we see this benefit also on the economic side, and the economic argument for how it changes neighborhoods and placemaking is a hot topic within the United States and Canada at this time. But one of the things that is perhaps the hardest sell is talking about the environmental impact. And there's a number of different ways in which the arts can actually impact the environment. One of the things that I get asked a lot whenever an arts organization or artist comes to me is, what's the first and easiest thing that I can do to improve my environmental impact? And the thing that I tell them might be a little bit surprising. So if we take a look at a couple of things that people have done, we have in Portland Center Stage, they have the first LEED Platinum certified building for a theater with their facility in downtown Portland. And when it opened, they had reused this shell. All the raw materials were selected for their proximity to the site. It's well located for public transit. They provide showering and changing facilities by those who are coming on bicycle as commuters. They do rainwater harvesting. So they've created a hub, and part of this is also about creating public space and a place that the community can come into. Something that wasn't considered in the Portland Center Stage model is exactly how does this impact production. So one example of this, and this is something that we've been studying closely for a few years now, is Fisher Dox Associates did a study at Seattle Rep with the renovation there of looking at things like the power consumption for each of their actual shows. And Katie Oman led this study, this work that revealed that actual and real usage of power is actually only 15 to 30% of the connected load, the amount that it could be used within the theater. And what we've also found in other studies of behaviors is that if you think about these arts facilities and arts companies in the greater context of the community in which they exist, then you also have to start talking about, once you bring the audience in, the way that that interacts with a consumption system and what sort of offsets are created by having the audience there. Cultural and arts activity actually congregates people together and brings them together in such a way that it reduces environmental impact just by the act of going to the event itself. Within a museum context, no, this is not necessarily an arts museum, but at the Oregon Museum of Science and Industry, they've even created their own sort of exhibition standard, like the LEED standard that the Portland Center Stage used to get the accolades for their building. So what we see here is that there's a number of different ways in which these buildings and the way that they interact with their audiences are able to then reduce environmental impacts by bringing people together before they're actually doing anything actively around managing their environmental impact. And that there's sort of exponential impact when you combine it with community and self-identification and raising these issues within an arts context, as we see within the intrinsic impact data, shows that one of the biggest things and most important things that artists and arts organizations can do is to is to just bring people together and to make good art. So the first thing that I tell people to do is to make sure that you're making stuff that people come and see, so that you're offsetting their activity by bringing them together. And we've started to look at things such as some work that we did with the Fusebox Festival in Austin in 2012. We started to look at how people interact with the system. Now, these graphs are probably a little hard to see here, and you can take a look at the study actually on our website at sustainablepractice.org. But we were looking at as the way that people interact with the festival over time and the concentrations of activity. And we also did that, and at the bottom graph there is actually showing the amount of local investment that we can expect that would come off of the festival activity at a time. The brown that you can sort of decipher there is the carbon footprint of the activity for people getting to and from and moving through the festival that time. And then there's a thin black line there that's not a dividing line, but is the cost of offsetting that carbon compared to the amount of local investment in there. So trying to look at different ways in which we can exchange value between environmental impacts, the economic impacts, and then the social impacts of bringing people together. So these are different ways of looking at the way that we might value sustainability within an arts context, that we can look at those different dimensions of sustainability and prove through different metrics that there is positive impacts already economically, socially, and environmentally, and that our goal is to build these values into our arts organizations and into our way of thinking about arts organizations so that we can put arts organizations at the center of our societies for driving them into a sustainable future. That's a bit of an overview. There will be resources that I can make available after the session that I know Dee has access to. If you have any questions, feel free to email me at ian@sustainablepractice.org, and thanks for giving me the time today.